Okay, welcome everybody to this month's presentation with Lisa Dougherty, New York State Vital Records. Just a quick promotion before we get started. A month from now on May 10th, Lisa will be doing a Q&A session. So check our calendar for that within the next week or two and feel free to sign up and come with your questions. You can use the chat feature or the Q&A feature here if you've got questions for Lisa as she goes along. And we may save them for the end or we may address them as we go, depending on what kind of rhythm we've got going. So feel free to use the chat or the Q&A for that. I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and for coming back for another month of genealogy presentations. Today's topic is probably not the most exciting thing we would talk about, but it is definitely a topic that I see a lot of questions about. There's a lot of confusion about this topic. And it's one of those things that if you can avoid a little confusion when it comes to things like vital records, then you're going to avoid quite a bit of frustration. Unfortunately, the frustration goes with the territory in this case. And since we're dealing with New York State, you're certainly going to run into some issues. But not knowing the situation or not knowing the ins and outs, that doesn't have to be one of them. So we are going to talk about the ins and outs of New York State Vital Records today. There's quite a bit of it, quite a bit of information that needs to be disseminated about this topic. It's one that is a very frequent question that I get. It's a very frequent question that I see thrown around on a lot of the Facebook genealogy groups. There's a lot of confusion. So hopefully this presentation will help to clear up some of that confusion for you. So a little bit of an overview. Now, full disclaimer here, when I first made this presentation, it was several years ago. And since then, there's been a lot of changes and I have updated it to reflect the changes, but I've kind of left the topics in here just to kind of give us an idea of where we were maybe a few years ago and how far we've come just to 2021. There's a lot of differences, especially as far as access to the index. That's changed quite a bit. So we'll go through that. Part one is basically going to be about how to access and how to use the index. And then part two is going to be more about how you can actually order the records. And again, there's been some changes here as well. So we'll go over those. Okay, so first of all, vital records are basically defined as records of birth, marriage, and death that are kept by a government entity. And in this case, the government entity that we're talking about is New York State. There are very many differences when we talk about different states and different countries. So if you are talking about Massachusetts, if you are talking about Vermont, if you are talking about Colorado, you will be talking about a completely different set of laws that govern the vital records for those localities. When you're talking about different countries, again, you will also be talking about different laws that govern those vital records. So today we're only going to be talking about vital records as they pertain to New York State. So if you're interested in another state, you're going to be dealing with a whole other set of records and set of rules. So usually the way vital records work is that there are the actual vital records, which are things like birth certificates, marriage certificates, and death certificates. Then there are indexes that help us access those vital records. So at the moment, we're going to be specifically talking about indexes because those are the only things that are available for New York State. We do not have public access to the records themselves. Those are restricted and they're not considered public records in New York State. That is different in other states, but in New York State, they're not considered public record. So the only thing we have access to as genealogists and as family history researchers are the indexes. So it used to be back in the old days that the only way that you could access the records, the vital records index, was to use it on microfiche. And microfiche are those little sheets of transparent plastic that have information on them and they have to be read in a reader. So this is going back a few years, but it used to be this was how we accessed the vital records index. The index is arranged alphabetically by year and then by a person's last name. So if you are looking for a death record from 1925, you would first find the year 1925, and then you would find the name of the person whose record you are looking for. So back in the old days, before we had this available on the internet, these were the only places in New York State where the microfiche for the Vital Records Index could be accessed. The main one being the New York State Archives in Albany. And these fiches are still accessible at the Albany New York State Archives, unfortunately still closed at this point, but they are still accessible there. And as far as I know, they're also still accessible at all of these other locations. The two closest to us are in bold here in Albany, the State Archives, and in Crandall Public Library in Glens Falls. These are the only ones that have the collection accessible via microfiche. This is a picture of how it's stored in Glens Falls at Crandall Library in these boxes. So all of the fiche are in these boxes. If we look at when we have accessibility to the indexes, we have accessibility for births from 1881 to 1942, for marriages from 1881 to 1967, and for deaths from June 1880 to 1967. The marriages and deaths are subject to a 50-year privacy law, and the births are subject to a 75-year privacy law. And that is simply to ensure the privacy of anyone who may still be living. 50 years doesn't seem to be quite long enough, maybe for marriage records. 75 years may not be quite long enough for births, but those are the laws that were put into place when this particular index was created. Places. What places in New York State does it cover? Well, of course, this being New York, it's going to have to be complicated. It can't just be simple and have it be everywhere in New York. That's not the way it is. Basically, the New York State Index covers every community in New York with the exception of New York City, Albany, Buffalo, and Yonkers prior to 1914 for births and deaths, or prior to 1908 for marriages. So those are kind of very convoluted type of restrictions, but basically if you think to yourself, okay, New York City is excluded here, and certain dates for Albany, Buffalo, and Yonkers, then you probably will have a good idea of what is available. So if your ancestor was born in Troy, or if your ancestor died in Glens Falls, or if your ancestor was married in Plattsburgh, all of those communities are included in the index. So the good news is that the index in the recent years has become available online. It is available on ancestry.com. Now, in order to use Ancestry, you have to either have a home subscription or you have to have access through your public library. Some public libraries are offering remote access. Some of them, if they are not open, you can go to their parking lots and use their Wi-Fi and access it through that way. If the Ancestry.com is available through a library website, it will be available only through their website. So you will have to access Ancestry through their website. You cannot go to Ancestry.com and access it that way. So on Ancestry.com, these are what are available to search. Birth index from 1881 to 1942. Marriage index from 1887 to 1967. Death index, Ancestry says, from 1852 to 1956. There are very few records before 1852, probably not even enough for you to bother looking. And I'm not quite sure where they get that opening year from. There's a City of Albany death index from 1870 to 1915, and we're going to take a look at that so you can see exactly what it is. And the City of Buffalo, an index to deaths from 1852 to 1944. So again, we're going to take a look at what these look like so you can get an idea of what you'll be looking at. Okay, so here is a sample of the death index from 1946. This one happens to be a lovely copy. We can read the names, we can read the first names, we can read the last names, we can read the places, and we can read all kinds of information here. So this is a really good example. You will notice that some of the place names are abbreviated, especially that Poughkeepsie. Where they got that spelling, I have no idea. But just be aware That is one of the things that's going to maybe trip you up here. N Rochelle is going to be New Rochelle, simply abbreviated so it will fit in the space provided. The age column is going to tell you how old the person was when they died. The date column is going to give you the date within the year. So we're looking at a specific year here, 1946. And the date column is telling you, okay, Sidney Penders died on the 15th of April in 1946. And then the final column is the certificate number. And if you are ordering from the state, it is necessary to have the certificate number. It's not necessary if you order it from anywhere else, but it is necessary if you order it from the state. So keep that in mind for when you see one that you will not be able to read, because that will certainly happen. Okay, so now here is what I was talking about when we were talking about the Albany Death Index. So this is an example of what the death index for Albany looks like for the years 1870 to 1877. If you look at it, you can see that all you are getting here are last names and page numbers. You're not getting any first names. You're not getting any specific dates. You're only getting last names and page numbers. So if you are looking for a person by the name of Jones or Smith or any other number of common names that died in Albany between 1870 and 1877, all you're going to get is a last name and a page number here. So this is really not a lot of use to people. If you have someone that has a very uncommon name, then you may be lucky and be able to say, okay, my ancestor that has this very uncommon last name died between 1870 and 1877 in the city of Albany. Not very specific, not very helpful. So this is what you're getting on Ancestry for the Albany Death Index. These deaths for Albany are not in the state index. You will not find them in the state index. So turning to marriages, this is what you will find in the state index for marriages in 1925. You will notice you're only getting one party's name here. You're not getting both parties' names. So for example, if you are looking at the marriage for Constantine Waller that occurred on the 12th of November in Tupper Lake, you don't have any clue here as to what the bride's name is. All you have is just the groom. The way to find the bride is to take the certificate number 43135 and put it in the search under keyword, or put the date and the place in the search and see if you can figure out how many females were married in Tupper Lake on that day. Again, Tupper Lake is a good one for this because how many marriages could have occurred in Tupper Lake on the 12th of November in 1925? Probably not many. If you're dealing with a larger city like Buffalo, and again, this is after the date when Buffalo is available in the state index, you're probably going to be dealing with multiple marriages on the same date. So it's very difficult to guess. So again, you have to compare certificate numbers to be able to figure out who the bride in this case is. But this is what you get for New York State Marriage Index in this time period in 1925. The format changes as the date gets more current. So for example, here is a marriage index from 1950. This does give us a clue to the bride's last name or the groom's last name, or should I say the spouse's last name. So if we look at Frank Pendleton married in Syracuse. The first four letters of his bride's last name is P-H-I-L. We can see that in the fourth column. We can also have we have the date, and we also have the certificate number. So at least we're getting a clue as to the name of the spouse here. So if you know who Frank Pendleton married, and it's not somebody whose last name begins with P-H-I-L, then you know you have the wrong record here. So at least it is a little bit helpful. So I think we got a question, Tanea.
Yes, we have a question. Are certificates possibly available in the actual city they were married or died in?
We're getting to that. We will get to that. Okay. So what about New York City? Okay, New York City is not included in the state index. If you want to deal with New York City, if you have ancestors from New York City, you're going to have to deal with New York City archives. They are a completely separate entity, completely separate from this database. They do not include any of the 5 boroughs of New York City. They do include the following. And again, because this is New York, we've got exceptions, we've got weird little twists. This is what comes from the official website of the New York State Vital Records. It does include the former towns of Kings County prior to their annexation by the city of Brooklyn in the 1880s and the 1890s. It does include Richmond County and the western portion of Queens County prior to their incorporation into the city of New York in 1898. So this is a real nitpicking part. And that's going to be something that if you are dealing with these areas, then you're going to have to become familiar with. Some of the New York City Vital Records are available transcribed at Family Search. So if you are looking for some New York City records, my first place to look would be Family Search. Okay, Tanea, a few more questions.
Somebody asked about a handout, and so I just said, yes, it should have come through your email today.
Okay, great.
If not, email me back and let me know.
Okay. All right, so that's New York City, not in the jurisdiction of the New York State Index. All right, so if you are looking at Fiche, if you are in a location looking at Fiche are going to be stored in boxes arranged by year. Names are arranged on each fiche in alphabetical order by surname. If we go a little bit later on, then you're going to use the Soundex system. And if any of you have been doing genealogy for a long period of time, then you know that Soundex was a indexing system whereby last names were indexed by sound alike. So hence the Soundex. Surnames are coded into numbers, and then they are ranged by numbers. If you look up Soundex calculator in Google, it will take you to a Soundex converter, and you can put your last name in the converter and it will give you the Soundex number. This is not something that we need to concern ourselves with if we are using the Ancestry Index, because we can just simply search by surname. So we don't need to worry about the Soundex. It's only if you're using the Fiche. All right, so here is a lovely picture of one of the fiches, and you can see some of them are not really very easy to read. So this is what you would be looking at if you were looking at Fiche. And this is going to go over a little more closely what information is included for each event. So in the index, for each event, you're going to get the surname and the first name of the person. You're going to get the date of the event. You're going to get the place of the event. And you're also going to get the state file number. In some situations, you will get a little more information, like in the marriages where we saw in the 1950 marriages, we got the first 4 letters of the spouse's surname. The places of the event require special mention. If you are looking at the Fiche in the New York State Library, they have a little notebook that's the Gazetteer of New York. And if you encounter a place name that you don't know, you can go to this book, you can go to this Gazetteer, and you can look it up and you can tell what county it's in. And I can tell you that for as many times as I have looked at the New York State Vital Records Index, every single time I look at it, I encounter a town I have never heard of. And New York has thousands of place names. So it's impossible for us to be able to know every single place name that appears in this index. That's where the Gazetteer comes in. The other thing you can do is you can simply Google it. I had the situation this morning where there was a place called Tripoli I was looking at, and I was like, where is Tripoli? Come to find out, it's a little hamlet near Fort Anne, New York. Never heard of it in my life. So these are the things that you are going to learn as you are using the Vital Records Index. Another thing I do frequently is I ask Google, hey, Google, where's Tripoli, New York? Sometimes she knows, sometimes she doesn't. So just a heads up. One of the things that you should be aware of in using the birth index is that not every child was named when the birth was registered. You will see a lot of entries that say simply Smith, male, Smith, female. That just means that the child was not given a name prior to the registration of the birth. I find I have the most success in the birth indexes if I don't search using a first name. Often you will also see something like Smith, male, SB. SB meaning stillborn. That means that child was not born living. Those births are registered both in the birth index and also in the death index. So you will find 2 of those registrations. So just be aware, if you are searching for births, it'll be more effective if you're just searching with a last name and not a first name as well. So one of the places, and the main place where the index was accessible, is in the New York State Library and Archives, which unfortunately continues to be closed. So this is not an option at this point. Just quickly, it was on the 11th floor. So if you've never been to the archives, you would go to the 11th floor. You have to sign in at the desk. You have to put your personal items in a locker. You're allowed to bring in loose papers and pencils. You have to sign up for a microfiche reader, and then you use the fiche that are located there. So this will be, again, accessible when the archives opens up again. So some tips for searching the index. So one of the things that we often don't know is sometimes we don't know the date of death of someone. Sometimes that's not something that we know, and we need to figure that out. It's going to be more efficient if you narrow it down before you go and start using the index. A lot of times what I do is I use census records to narrow down a date of death. So maybe the person appears in the 1900 census, but does not appear in the 1910 census. So that helps us to understand that, okay, that person died between 1900 and 1910. You can also use websites like Find a Grave. Sometimes city directories have dates of death in them. Also, census records can be used to approximate a year of birth because the census record gives ages for people. So that can help us also to figure out a year of birth. Also, a year of marriage. The 1900 and the 1910 census tell us how many years a couple has been married. So you can use that information to figure out a marriage date. You might also want to keep in mind that when the law was new in the 1880s, it took people a few years to begin complying with the law. Now, if you remember this past year in 2020, the bag ban came into being, and people had to start bringing their cloth bags or their reusable shopping bags to the store. Well, I don't know about you, but I still forget to bring my reusable shopping bags into the store. So it's obviously taking me a little while to comply with the new law. And it's the same idea with these certificates. When New York State decided that births, marriages, and deaths needed to be registered with a local government, people were very slow to adapt to this new law. They may have been used to bringing their child to the church to get baptized, or they may have been used to, talking to the cemetery people when someone died, but they were not used to going to the town offices to register those events. So that's something that it took them a while to get used to. So you're going to find in the early years that not every death and not every marriage and not every birth was recorded. So if you look at the indexes for the 1880s, you're going to notice that they're not very large. You're not going to find as many people in them. You're also going to need to look for surnames under varied spellings. Now, of course, this is something that we are used to as family historians. We are so used to having to look at different spellings. But if you're dealing with names like, O'Donnell or, McMahon or something like that, make sure that you also look for the names without the prefixes. So look for Donnell and Mahan instead of using the Mick and the O, or any other names that may have prefixes. You want to look for them without them. And again, we talked about the gazetteer that was located in the New York State Archives that you could look up unfamiliar towns. Sometimes if you find an entry that looks promising and the event occurred in a town that you're not familiar with, it helps to look in the gazetteer to say, oh, that town's in Fulton County and that's where my ancestor lived. So that does make sense. But if it's in a county that you know your ancestor never lived in, then you know it's probably not your ancestor. So those are good ways of getting clues. We talked about the births not always containing the child's first name. You're going to get a lot more reliable search by using a surname and a place. The other thing that you want to do is you always want to look at the original record image. And when we're talking about the Ancestry Index, I can tell you from firsthand experience that it's very poorly done. It seems like it was rushed to get put online so that this record set could be used. And I'm not sure that the people doing the indexing were very familiar with New York State place names, because I find that a lot of the place names are very poorly transcribed in the index. The other problem is that many of the fiches are very poor quality and they're unreadable. Even if you're looking at Fiche on a machine, you're going to find problems with the Fiche. Some of the later ones even are to the point of you can't even make out the letters on the Fiche. And if you can imagine you're trying to transcribe for an index using these really poor quality images, your transcription is not going to be very accurate. So when you are looking at a record, I want you to always look at the original record image, which is attached to the index. That way you can look at it and you can make up your own mind as to what it says. The other thing you might want to do is download the image and put it into image editing software. That may help you to read it better. So those are things that you may need to do. This is a search that I was doing the other day, and I just wanted to give you an example of how this is done. So I was searching for a person named Ramona Grieb. That was the name of the person I was searching for. When I put my search into Ancestry, the result that came up was this record for Rosine D. Gritch. The date was correct. I was looking for the date of 6th of August, 1933 in Syracuse, but this was the name that was returned to me. The actual image is below, and you can see that the name Grieb, it's scratched out a little bit, and to me it's obvious it says Grieb, but I know what I'm looking for, so I know that that's what it says. But the person who was transcribing this for the index thought that that said Gritch, and that the first name was Rosine, when actually the first name is Ramona. So you can see there are a lot of mistakes made here, and it's going to be a lot better for you if you actually look at the image of the actual record. It's going to help you make a determination as to what you're actually looking at. So don't be discouraged by the index because it can be very discouraging. So now what do we want to do if we want to order some of these records? Say we found a record for our ancestor in either the death records or the marriage records or the birth records. How are we going to order a New York State Vital record? Well, in days gone by, it used to be that we had two options. Our first option was to order from the New York State Department of Health. Second option was to order from a local town clerk. Well, this has been altered a little bit in recent days. For ordering records at the New York State Department of Health, it's located in Menands at 800 North Pearl Street. They do take drop-off orders. They take mail orders. I do not believe they take email orders. They only take drop-off and through the mail. Local and village clerks can take orders any way you can get a hold of them, over the phone, through the email, through the mail, walk-in, completely going to depend on the local clerk. Some clerks are very conscientious. They will answer emails immediately. They will answer your questions on phone. I've had people give you information over the phone. It just depends on the particular clerk. Every one of them is going to be different. Information about local clerks can be obtained by a Google search. Just put the name of the locality you're looking for, and that locality would be the name that you find in the index, in the Vital Records Index, and then say Glens Falls City Clerk, and that will come up in Google. It will give you the location and the hours. So you are going to need to fill out a form in most cases. Definitely if you're requesting from the New York State Department of Health, and usually from the larger cities. So if you are requesting from the city of Troy, for example, you do need to fill out this form. Most of the larger cities will have this form already on their website. So if you are ordering from the Troy City Clerk, this form is on the website. You can download it and print it out and fill it in. It can also be found on the New York State Department of Health website. So you can find this form in many places online. Your copy of a Vital record is going to cost you $22 if you have the exact date and the state file number. If you do not have the exact date or the state file number, the fees are on your right. So if you want a 1 to 3 year search, it's going to be $22. If you want a 4 to 10 year search, it's going to be $42. So for example, there is no reason for a search of any years because you have the index accessible to you. You should be able to give them an exact date and you should be able to give them an exact place and a file number. So there should be no reason to pay the state any more than you have to for the record. So local clerks can charge up to $22 for a record. They don't all do this. Most of the larger cities tend to charge the full $22. Some small town clerks will give information for free. I've had some clerks, for example, one that comes to mind is the city of Hornell in Steuben County, charge me $1 for a death record. Depends completely on the discretion of the smaller town clerks or on the city clerks. Just depends on what they are doing. Some of them generally tend to charge less money, but usually your larger cities are going to charge the full $22. Just keep that in mind. And that is per record. That's not that's not 2 or 3, that's one record. So how long can you expect for an order when you order? From the Department of Health, the current waiting time is 2+ years, and I am not kidding you. That is 100% accurate. I have a record that I ordered in July of 2018 that I still have not received yet. If you are a member of the New York State Genealogy group on Facebook, there is someone on that in that group who is tracking waiting times for people who have ordered from the Department of Health. He keeps a spreadsheet of when the record was ordered, how it was ordered, either via mail or by walk-in, and how long it takes to arrive. So he's got this information all spreadsheeted, and the average time at the moment is 2+ years. Before the pandemic, it was at 18 months. So it's gone up now with the pandemic, as you can imagine. The Department of Health has got a lot of things that it needs to do, and genealogy is very low priority at this point. So it's recommended that you do not order from the New York State Department of Health. It is recommended that if you need one of these certificates, you're going to have a lot better luck to order from the local community. I'm not sure about walk-in at this point. Walk-in is kind of sketchy. It's going to be up to the local clerks whether they offer a walk-in service. A lot of them don't. Recently, I've had experience with the city of Troy. They are about a week in processing time. So if you send them via mail a request for death certificates, birth certificates, marriage certificates, they will send you the certificate within a week or 2. So you can't beat that for service. Other places, you're going to have to either ask them or take a chance and send your request through the mail. It's just one of those things. It's going to vary widely by location. So take a chance, but definitely you have a much better chance of getting your certificate in a timely manner if you order from a local clerk as opposed to the state. So, okay, so what is the great thing about these certificates? Why do we even want to go to all this trouble and order these things? Well, sometimes they can be the only source for information that is contained on them. And that's why we go through the trouble and the expense of ordering these certificates. Believe me, I try to avoid them if at all possible, but sometimes it just isn't possible. So here's an example of a birth certificate, and not a really nice looking one either. Birth certificates are going to contain the kinds of information that you would expect. They're going to contain the information of both parents' names. They're going to have the address of the parents. They're going to have the ages of the parents, which can be very helpful. A birthplace for the parents, usually this is going to be fairly non-specific. So it's either usually going to be a state or a country. It's going to give occupations for the parents. It's going to give the name of the child, if the child was named at the time of the registration of the birth. It's going to give the place of the birth. So if it was a home birth, if it was a hospital birth, it's going to give that information. It's also going to give the information and the person who was giving the information, the physician or the midwife that was attendant at the birth. So this would be a typical birth certificate. And this one comes from, trying to read the date, 1916. So this one's from 1916. This is a fairly typical birth certificate. So one of the things that you may see is that there's something called a delayed birth certificate. A delayed birth certificate is a certificate of birth that was filed well after the actual birth occurred. Sometimes what happens is that if you were born in a specific period of time, say you were born about 1880, 1881, and you needed a birth certificate down the line for things like military service or a passport or even Social Security, you could go to the community where you were born and you could file for a delayed birth certificate. So you would have a birth certificate that was issued to you well after your date of birth, but still usable for legal things like a passport or a Social Security application or for military service. Delayed birth certificates are only held by the state. So if you need to get a delayed certificate, your only option is going to be applying to New York State. Local clerks don't have these. They have to be filed with the state, and that's where they are held. So if you see the term delayed birth certificate, this is what it is. Here's an example of a delayed birth certificate. Now, one of the things about a delayed birth certificate that sticks out to me immediately is that the handwriting is beautiful and that it's very, easy to read. So that is probably a function of it being much later in life. So this person was actually born in 1886, but the delayed birth certificate wasn't issued until 1943. And that could be because he was applying for military service. So that will give you an example of a delayed birth certificate. So what is available on a marriage certificate? Marriage certificate is going to probably be your most useful vital record. And the reason for that is because it contains information about two parties, the bride and the groom. So on most marriage certificates, there is going to be a place where the parents' names are going to be able to be put. And that's going to be very valuable information. So say you're dealing with your Irish immigrant ancestor who was born in Ireland and you have no idea what the names of their parents are. This may be a very good source for the names of the parents. So it gives the names of the parents. It gives the birthplace of the parents. You can tell on here, it just says US, so not terribly helpful. It gives the place of birth for the person. So this tells us that Charles was born in town of Day in Saratoga County, and Luella was born in the town of Easton, probably in Washington County. It will give the names of the person, the name of the person who officiated at the marriage. Sometimes we'll also give the names of witnesses to the marriage, who are often relatives. So that can be very helpful. And of course, it also gives the date and the place of the marriage. So marriage certificates can be very useful if you can find them. Here's a transcription of a marriage certificate. If you order from a local community, a lot of times what you're going to get is a transcription. When these records first began to be recorded, they were recorded in very large books. So they were recorded in volumes where there would be a name and then the information going across a very large book. And generally, these books tend to be about 2 feet by 3 feet. So they're very large. And that would be to have a lot of information in them. So rather than copying an entire page, which is going to contain many names, clerks take the information from the book and transcribe it onto a form. So you don't get to see the actual record, but the trade-off here is that you get your record within a few weeks and not within 2 years. So that's where you're going to have the trade-off. So death certificates. Death certificates are very popular because, again, we are dealing with maybe a relative or an ancestor who was an immigrant or someone for whom we don't have parents' name information. So a death certificate can be very helpful for finding out what the name of the parents are. This person happened to be born in Ireland, and his parents were also both born in Ireland, but this is a very useful record because it gives the name of the father and the mother, including the mother's maiden name, which is the bare minimum of information that you would need to look for someone in Irish records. It also gives the cause of death, which is always fascinating. If your ancestor died from an accident, that might be another source of information to go and look for a newspaper account of the accident. It also gives you the place of burial for the person. So if you don't know where your ancestor is buried. The other very important piece of information on this document is the person that gave the information to the clerk for recording. Sometimes we can judge the accuracy of this particular record by the name of the person who gave the information. So if you look at the name of the person who's giving the information and it's not somebody who's familiar to you, or it's not someone who was a relative of the person, maybe it was a neighbor, then you may be able to look at this record and think, okay, this information may not be that accurate. So it's a good way to gauge the accuracy of the information that's given. However, just because the person is a family member doesn't mean that the information is always going to be accurate. As a matter of fact, I've seen a lot of inaccurate information, especially on death certificates, because if you think about it, the person who is concerning and the person whose record this is no longer around to give the information. So therefore, any of this information is given secondhand. It's not given by that person. So we do have to take any information except for maybe the cause of death with a grain of salt here. And here's an example of a transcripted death certificate. This contains the ever popular parents' names of not given, which I just love when you pay $22 for a record like this, and that's what you end up with. Unfortunately, it happens. All right, what about New York City? Briefly, we mentioned there are some transcriptions available on Family Search. I would stop there first. So if you're looking for information from death records for ancestry or for New York City, I would go to Family Search first. There are also indexes that are available on the Italian and German genealogy group websites. Those are basically going to cover indexes. They're not going to give you all the information. The Family Search databases will give you a little bit more information than the indexes will. So those would be the places that I would check first. When the Family Search or when the Family History Library reopens, and again, it's still not open, when it reopens, you can go to the Family History Library branch in Loudonville, and you can look at the actual certificates from New York City there in the branch library in Loudonville. So if you have a lot of research that you're doing in New York City, I would highly recommend scheduling a trip to the Family History Library in Loudonville when it reopens, because you will be able to see and save the actual images of the records. Well worth the trip to go there. There's lots of information about accessibility for New York City records available on the Family Search Wiki. The Family Search Wiki is a wonderful resource if you've never used it. It has tons of information about where to find records. So everything that I've spent the last 45 minutes talking about, you can also find on the Family Search Wiki. Information about where to get New York State vital records, where to get New York City vital records, where to get basically any record that you can possibly think of. You will be able to find that out on the Family Search Wiki. Another thing that you should be aware of is this website called Reclaim the Records. This website is a fabulous resource. This is a group that has put together class action lawsuits over the years to demand public records be put back in the public domain. If any of you have had experience with trying to access vital records from certain government agencies, you know that there can be a lot of obstacles toward getting those records. This organization files lawsuits to gain accessibility to these records. They have gotten accessibility to so many records over the years. It's worth looking at their website to see what types of things have been found. There are many of things from New York State that have been come about because of lawsuits brought by the Reclaim the Records group. So definitely look at this website and get information about how their efforts to get these records back in the public domain. And this basically covers the entire United States. It's not just New York State. Okay. Who's got some questions? Tons of information there. Lots of information. It's really, really crazy. It's a slippery slope. There's a lot to it.
While we wait for people to perhaps type something in, I'll just remind you that on May 10th, Lisa will be doing a Q&A session over Zoom. So check the library's calendar for that within the next week or two. That should be posted. And this session she's doing right now is being recorded. So if you want to go back and watch it again, it will be posted on the library's YouTube channel within the next handful of days. I will also send a link to everyone who signed up for today once that video is live. And so you'll get a link directly to it if you're attending right now.
Great.
Any announcements you want to make, Lisa?
Yeah, sure. I am back at the Clifton Park Library live and in person. I started back this past Thursday, well, 2 weeks ago, I guess now. So for the first Thursday of every month, I will be in the local history room from 11. I'm going to start next month at 11:30. So 11:30 to 1:30, and I will be taking 4 appointments every month. So the next date is May 6th. I have 3 appointments left. If you're interested in coming in and speaking to me in person, the meetings are held in the local history room. We have a very large table there, so we are able to social distance, and we're wearing masks. But the point is that we get to come back live. We are doing one-on-one appointments. You have to do them through me. So you can use the email address at the bottom of your screen to contact me to make an appointment. As I mentioned, I started this back on April 1st. I had 4 appointments. They went very well. It was wonderful to be back and having human interaction again. So if you are in the area of Clifton Park and you want to make an appointment, contact me, please. And I would be glad to set that up for you.
Great. Now we have a question.
Sure.
Do county offices have records if you are not sure of the exact town, like marriage possible in Altamont, but known in Albany County?
Albany County has, well, no, not Albany County. I would say your best bet is going to be the index, to look in the index. Marriage records are one of those weird kind of records. Sometimes the cities have them, sometimes the towns have them, sometimes they have them at county facilities. I can tell you at the Albany County Hall of Records, they have marriage records for the city of Albany. It makes no sense. It's a county facility, but they have marriage records for the city. And the Albany County Hall of Records is open for research by appointment. So if you want to go down there and look at their microfilm of marriages that occurred in the city of Albany, you can do that, but you do have to make an appointment to go there. But again, it's going to vary county by county. So if you're looking for an Albany County marriage, you're not going to find it at the Albany County Hall of Records. Your best bet is going to be look in the state index and see if you can find the marriage and what community it occurred in. But again, you won't find it in Albany before 1913. So those weird exceptions.
Got a question about the one-on-one sessions. Is there a charge?
No, everything is completely free. Email me and we will set up a time. I believe I have 11:30, 12, and 12:30 still remaining. I switched it to 11:30 because the library does not open till 11. And I did not want to cheat anybody out of their time. So I figure if we have it at 11:30, that will give everyone ample time to get there and get settled. So send me an email if you'd like to schedule an appointment.
Actually, we have expanded our hours, so we are open at 9 now.
Oh, okay. All right. See, the second I changed it, it's all right. No problem. But I'm going to keep it at 11:30 for this time coming up, and we'll see how it works. So if anybody has any questions later on, please feel free to email me. My email address is on the screen right now, and it will also be in the handouts, which Tanea has mailed out to everybody or will be mailing out.
Yes, I did send out the handout attached to the email you got this morning for today's session. If for some reason that didn't come through to you, just let me know and I'll send it along again.
Great.
Join us May 10th. Oh, sorry, we got one more question.
Okay.
Any tips on northern upstate New York about 4 to 5 generations where family left to go into Canada for 2 generations and then back to upstate New York?
Okay. What religion? That would be my question. If they're Catholic, you're going to be looking at the Druin records, DROUIN. Those are available on Ancestry. If they're not Catholic, then you're probably just going to have to figure what church they attended. But hopefully they're Catholic, and hopefully you'll be able to check the Druin records, because the Druin records are actually the vital records of Quebec. They are, and they're very extensive and they're very comprehensive. They go back to the 1600s. So if you have Catholics in Quebec and even sometimes in Ontario, you can use the Druin to hopefully find baptisms and marriages and burials. All right. So anybody else got any questions? Thank you everyone for being here today, and hopefully we'll have you all back next month for a question and answer session. And so save up your questions and let me know. And if you are able to make an appointment to come in on May 6th, send me an email and we'll set that up. So thank you very much, Tanea.
Thank you, Lisa.
We'll see you next month.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.